Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Circle for You. I have Jeanne here with me, who I am so excited, and my heart is so full after our conversation, just getting to know each other right before this recording. She has so much to share with us today, but I'm just going to start by introducing her. Jeanne is a physical anthropologist tenured at New York University, who has found herself leaving full-time academia and applying her scientific training to her study of her own inner experiences. Motivated by her role as a mom at 41 years of age, she began a spiritual journey, which eventually led to her to Santa Barbara Conscious Evolution Community as co-founder member. Jeanne's first circle experiences there would guide her into the co-leadership of Gather the Women, the promotions of women's circles and many affiliate groups, and the co-founding of the online connectory called Lighted Pages that invited women's circle into the one framework. Her current website, www.godmotherproject.com, which was gathered her wisdom for 2 decades of women's circles, and it's offered for free for the individual or group exploration. She's just a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so appreciate you're here with me today, Jeanne. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's great to be here.
Before we get started, there was one thing I forgot to mention. I kept meaning to while we were chatting beforehand, but I thought maybe it was better to mention. I actually did go to New York University for my graduate and undergraduate degree, and I actually we were talking mentioning how September 11th was a pivotal point in the creation of what she did. But I was actually in New York. I don't know if you were in New York as well for September 11th, but I was at NYU, and I was the first graduating class after 9/11 from NYU.
Wow.
So that came up, and I kept meaning to say it in our conversation, but I guess it was meant to just be live when we shared it. So on that note, though, what I'm asking each of our guests to do is just, as we do in Circle, we start with intention, and we start with a little bit of grounding and getting into it. So to help us get into a little bit of deeper conversation, I'm just going to turn it over to Jeanne to let her ground us in whatever way she sees fit.
So generally speaking, I would do an attunement is how I frame it. And essentially just to move our energy within ourselves. We're so used to looking around and seeing what we have to relate to that this is very, very important to be able to rest within our inner space. And in fact, I've heard it said that this inner space, if we can make it no thought, is really like opening a doorway for Source to speak through us. So that's what I'd do first, is I'd say, relax our minds as much as possible, quiet them, feel relaxed in every part of our body. From the head, work your way down. Feel you're sitting in the chair, our feet on the floor. An open channel of safe, no thought space that can receive the information and share our information as it would benefit ourselves and the whole group. Feeling that space of no thought, just together, co-creating this field of safety and love. And so it is.
So it is. I love that idea of co-creating that safety and love. That just, as soon as you said that, like I could just feel this warmth of energy in my heart, and I can feel the connection, and I feel so blessed. I mean, even it's the two of us, but creating that circle energy as we get started. And I just really want, again, just reminding everyone that my message and my purpose of these interviews are to really just bring this concept of women's circle into the forefront and understanding what it's about and why it's important to each one of us and what we can benefit from it. And since I myself am only in this for been in this for a couple of years, I thought, what is the best way to express that but go to the experts who've been doing this for years and years and to learn from them. And so that is why I have Jeanne here today. So why don't you just start by telling us your experience with Circle?
I was trying to remember the first one that I was in, and it was when I was at NYU. A woman there in the 80s, I think this was, she decided that she would invite women from across the university to come together. We shared coffee or something, but we were together in a room that was across a dining room and a living room, and nobody could see everybody. And there was something about the geometry that was not exactly perfect. But that was my very first one. And then jump ahead, maybe 14 years or something like that. And then I was in Santa Barbara, not New York anymore. And I had met and heard this woman speak, Barbara Marx Hubbard. And she asked the question, what would happen if everyone who wanted to shift themselves in the world toward more conscious evolution got together? And about 200 people showed up. And I was one of them. The words for me were conscious evolution in community. So those were all my vibe words, and her method of doing that was to have everyone who was interested in a subject start their own circle and then come to a gathering of the whole once a month to share what they had learned or whatever was right. Barbara got circle when she was running for vice president of the United States. Now, I can't remember what year this was, but she hooked up with Carolyn Anderson, and the two of them, Carolyn and Sanford Anderson, I think, the three of them instituted these kind of gatherings, local gatherings for Barbara. And it had a spiritual overtone, but it was in politics. And they had such good responses that Barbara got to give a speech at the Democratic Convention. And as she walked up to give her speech, the man said to her, "No one's going to be paying attention to you, so speak for the universe." So this comes to me to tell you Barbara's story more than mine, because these circles, as they started forming, were organic. And Carolyn and Catherine Roski wrote a book called, and now it's called The Co-Creator's Handbook. And we used that as a kind of a guideline. It has all kinds of exercises in it and so on to start up our first groups, our first circles. And it was so organic. It just wanted to happen, it just, and then this was about 1998, 99, when this was happening. So we had our community going full speed ahead at the time when the Twin Towers fell. And it was a community of men and women, but we noticed there were about 2/3 women and a third were men. I don't think we had children, but they would come sometimes, depending on what the circumstance was. And it just seemed as though with the falling of the towers, there was an effort being made. And one of our community members was in that effort. Barbara was part of it too, I believe, to start up something called Gather the Women. And I don't know the exact relationship, but it's very close that that emphasis was being pushed. Gather the women. You tell 3 women, tell them to tell 3 women, and we'll have 1 billion women before we know it. So there was all of this feeling inside, which you have a lot when you speak too, Michelle. Now is the time. And so we took these circle principles and we brought them to the first Gather the Women event. Bonnie Kelly was connected to Kathy Schaff and Marilyn Nyborg, and I'm missing one name, and they knew they were the bridge between the circles and what was going to happen, why we were gathering the women. And so the whole event was about circles. We sat at circle tables. it was self-organized. Anybody who wanted to do anything could do anything. This was 2003. There were people from all over the world. Joyce Oneko from Africa is the name that pops up for me. Teresa Ruelas was there. There were already circles starting in other directions, that came from the business world or from therapeutic worlds. And we somehow came together in that event. And we had one more Gather the Women event in Dallas, Texas, that was international like that. And then Gather the Women Kathy Schaff really spearheaded something to have a Gather the Women on every continent. We didn't quite make all the continents, but in the process of doing that, back in Santa Barbara, Bonnie Kelly and Lucky Sweeney were developing something called Evolutionary Women. And again, it was based on Circle. And I was partnering with Bruce Schumann, and we made a website for women who were coming together in Evolutionary Women. And ultimately, it would be also for Gather the Women. So that if you had a small circle, you could be present on here. If you had the whole organization, you could be present on here. Behind the scenes, administrators could mix and match different localities or interests, depending on what kinds of relationships there were between the organizations. It was so exciting. So all of this kind of launched in the early part of the 2000s. And the internet wasn't solid yet. There were all kinds of computers that didn't work well, and all kinds of ways it didn't work so well because not everybody was as integrated as they are now into the internet. So eventually, I like to say Facebook went out and my light pages didn't. And it's still up. You can go see it if you want to see the organizations that were there. And we had a group of about 10,000 people at the end. And to Gather the Women went on from light pages to go to Facebook because it was the avenue where you could gather women around the world much more easily. So all of that's circles. Now about the circles themselves. No one really knew. Go ahead.
Well, just before you start telling us about circle cells, I just want to ask more about your feelings. Like, what were some of the things you gained in this process of circling? Like, what did you gain as a person and your feelings, and what changed in you as you circle before we go into details?
Oh, thank you. I used to say that I would go to circle to feel the love of God, and then I would go home to do the work. So in other words, relationships were challenging for everybody. And at the same time, going into these circles was a resonant place of love. And it elevated you to be in the circle. I have some thoughts about that. I'll go into that. But for me particularly, I remember saying to someone who wasn't sure about whether they wanted to join or come or whatever it was, I can't remember. And I said, but there's so much love there. And it was the group, after a year or two, we would come into a group of, say, 70 people. And we called it palpable. We could feel the energy that we had created. And even after people started leaving Santa Barbara, there was a natural, I call it a diaspora. That was it. We did our work creating that. But whenever we had a reunion, the palpable love was still there. It was as though we co-created something extremely valuable. And I do think that for Barbara, when she went online, she had a source base here on earth of this field that we had co-created. And that made her work much more impactful. She was never really sure what this community was doing. It was so funny. But that love was really an energy that you couldn't deny. And I still,
That's
when Barbara
powerful.
died, there was a community event and people could still feel it.
Amazing.
And so that was not so long ago, 2018 or something like that. So I was trying to imagine what we had done. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I had an experience as an anthropologist where I realized that everyone was so busy presenting themselves that the conversation I wanted to have at this conference that I co-organized, nobody could talk around their own presentations. So it was actually part of the reason why I left academia, because I didn't see how one could go further. It was about presentation. And I know that we reference each other in the articles, but it was so much, for me anyway, about presentation. So when I came into conscious evolution, it was like a new intersection for me. And I took a lot of notes trying to understand what was happening there, because I would have loved to have created a context like that for all the people I wanted to bring together and see what what we would see together that would enlighten everybody. And that was one of the thoughts I had, that when we come together, we bring the whole of our experience. If we're really authentic in sharing, we bring the whole of our experience, which is not only a thought, but it's the energy of it. So if you get a group of 10 people in the room and you go around and you've shared 10 different perspectives, you now have a bigger picture. That's simple. That's easy to see. Why you have a deeper picture as well as a higher picture in yourself, you feel the energy of that connection.
I have to agree with you so much when you get people together in that circle and just all of a sudden, and you don't even have to, because part of the part I love about circle is not that advice giving, but it's really that deep listening, because you get this sense of knowing from truly listening to someone. I think that's part of the energy that is created, is that we get this sense of being seen, heard, and known ourselves, but then we get to actually see those people because we're not worried about what we're going to say or how we're going to interpret it. We're just simply listening. And that energy shift in really listening and knowing people, I think, is what helps create what you've been speaking of.
Knowing them on another level. Yeah. There's a trust that emerges, so you can feel safe. We used to speak about speaking from the heart. So you're going authentic, not presentation mode, but authentic. And
I love that too, because when you say authentic mode is with the heart, is when it's your turn to speak what you thought you were going to say, because you're going to respond to someone else, like when it wasn't your turn or you didn't get a turn yet. All of a sudden, when it's your turn for a reason, and your heart's ready to let in whatever was in there. And a lot of times you had no idea that was even going to come out. And I think that's the beauty of really also learning about yourself in this process, is giving yourself that chance to, when it is eventually your turn, or when it comes up for whatever reason, it's that space and time that you needed to release what you did from yourself. And circle does bring up a lot of those feelings and anxiety that might be shifted down, and we kind of work through that to bring to the surface. And like you said, going back and doing the work afterwards, because circle kind of like brings it up and you have this fellowship, but then, and this camaraderie and this love in the circle, but then you still back to the real world.
Yeah.
and have to apply what you're learning, but you keep coming back for that medicine of refueling in circle, is how I see it.
I think that idea of a space of no thought comes to me, because so often we are thinking about what we're going to say next. We're not really present with the person who's speaking. And when you actually experience everyone listening around you, you have the space to hear yourself. That's incredible too. Not somebody else's voice saying you did something wrong here, or you've got your hair's wrong, or whatever, the different kinds of information we get from outside. that information from inside, when you actually hear what you're saying, you slow down. I realized just right here, I was really kind of full of the history of things and I wasn't really feeling them. And I want to really thank you for saying, slow down, tell me how you're feeling.
And
That was
I
great.
think I felt that a little bit because I think that's part of the circle aspect as well, is that I love how you said to slow down because we're in the busyness of it all and we struggle to slow down, but circle provides that space and that place and the necessity to do it, to really listen in. And I know that part of the reason why I love circle so much is we struggle to sit with ourselves. And this gives us a chance to get to know ourselves in community so that sitting with ourselves later on becomes easier and easier as we get to know ourselves and realize that,
Yeah.
yeah, not so bad after all. It takes
That's
time.
amazing. There,
So on that note, I do want to now go into a little bit of the logistics of how you have participated in circles and how they've been created through your eyes and some recommendations and things that you've seen throughout your years in circle of someone who may never known about circle or what are some
Mm.
starting points or any kind of logistical tidbits you can give us.
um, well, I'll go back to Santa Barbara and say that because I have it up here that I was going to say this, I think, that a group of us decided that we would like to come to the same intention as everybody in the group, in the whole community, but particularly start with ourselves. And the book I mentioned, the Co-Creator's Handbook, has a set of principles that are to be followed. We took those and then made our own. We started with some. So one might be to listen to my heart. And then we have a little description of that. To maintain resonance. I agree to take responsibility for maintaining the resonance of the group. And our last one was lighten up.
I love
Because everybody is so serious. But I felt that quality of, starting with something, it's easier because if you don't have something you start with, but then try to really come to what feels right to you. And they're always the same in some sense. I figured out in my sense of things, there are 3 different principles I think are fundamental. And then you can add what you like. One is to really speak authentically from your heart. Another is to listen with that open mind. Open mind, open will, open heart. Otto Scharmer's words. And the third one I think is so important is to recognize the presence of the bigger space that you're co-creating. If somehow you don't do, and it happens naturally, you put flowers in the middle of the circle, or you have the attunement so that you've got some awareness of that space. I think that is probably the most critical thing on the planet right now. Those three things, speak authentically, listen openly, and recognize the bigger picture. And so whenever I do anything, those are the 3 that I hit, and then try to, the hit is the wrong word.
I love that concept though, but yeah, the
Yeah.
intention behind it and the things that you make sure that you take part in each time you do this. But those even just seem like great aspects to just guide your day and making
Yes.
sure you're doing those things. Because I think that's the part that I love most about Circle is you start to practice these things with a safe space, like you said, and then you do the work at home because now you're able to apply these principles. For me, for instance, like applying the listening to my kids. I'm no longer trying to fix their problems. I'm now clenching my lips together saying, are you done? Like, and again, going back to the pause, because we have to do that in Circle, is like waiting for people to finish speaking because we can't assume all the time people are done. It's the beauty of the pause. And that, especially with kids, as a lot of moms will be listening to this as well, is letting the kids guide that and don't just jump in because they're done talking. Give them that silence to see if they're done. and then ask what they need from you rather than assume you know what they need.
Hmm.
And we're just learning to do that with each other. And the same thing, I believe the circle provides that beauty and that learning of it, because we don't say, okay, well, this is what you should do because this is the problem you had. It's no, just listen to this person, recognize them,
Right.
acknowledge that their pain or their glory also, because a lot of times as women we dim ourselves and say, I can't celebrate you, we're not allowed to celebrate, we can only suffer together. And that's not true. We can celebrate and lift each other up as well. And that's what I found through circle is really celebrating that. And it doesn't always have to be a struggle that we bring to the circle. It could be a celebration,
Mhm.
and really embracing each other for that. And when the people are ready to celebrate and there's others having struggles, is that we use that energy to help each other bring the medicine that each of us needs at that moment.
Mm. Yeah, I do love circles. I was going to add into it that the non-judgment is so important. The open mind, open heart, open will. That space of no thought. If you put judgment in there, people feel it. So there's a way we're practicing really accepting each other the way we are, just the way we are. And we do have a few rules, like we said 2 minutes for a check-in. Someone held a bell. We don't do it anymore. And I would say that's a little sloppy sometimes. But sometimes people really do need to talk longer. So it's a call. And you do the reminder, that everyone take responsibility for themselves. But I think in life in general, if humanity could get rid of that judgment call, I mean, we have it from the time we're born. We're just told what's wrong with us, and how to behave and the shoulds that we need. And no one ever, this is presumably there are more and more people who raise their kids the way that you're raising your kids. So they have some space to become themselves and not be so strictly guided by the outside world. That's what we need.
And that's when I start to let go of some of that rigidness, is when I start to see the true beauty of each of their dreams and goals and the things that they want to do,
Yes.
and trying to foster those as I was learning to foster myself. And I want to go back to the non-judgment, but also you're learning to be non-judgmental towards yourself. And I think that is the hardest part, because it's so much easier to say, oh, to your friend and give them that comfort. But again, circle isn't even about the comfort of it, because we don't want to say crying or feeling what we feel is bad. So we actually in circle try to refrain from reaching and touching, to let them just experience what they need to at that moment. And I find that so beautiful in circle, that you're not trying to say, oh, dear, you don't need to do that, and suffocate that one more time. And we do that to our kids as well. I mean, sometimes when I can't take my little one screaming her head off, I'll just walk away for a little while. I won't tell her they're there, but like I'll come back and keep checking till I'm ready to process it as well. But I think we've tried to stifle our feelings for so long, and circle gives that intention and possibility of learning how not to do that anymore, and to be going through the emotion, to go through it, not live in it. And I think a lot of that, as moms, we try sometimes just to live in our negativity or live in those same cycles. But we do need to experience them, but it doesn't mean that we need to stay in them. And circle helps us move through them with the support of the women.
I think I agree with you 100%, and really appreciate your passion about it, and how easily the words flow out of your mouth to describe it. I just love it. I was thinking about what you were saying about the benefit to yourself, because I was thinking about how little I knew when I was 21 and thought I was grown up. And the same thing when I was 31 and 41 and so on. And there is a kind of a sense that when you hear yourself, you become more self-knowing. You can see where the pieces of yourself are that you would like to change. And even though they're neurologically in place, that's the thing we know about the nervous system now. It can change, it's plastic. But if you don't see yourself, you don't notice your habits, you don't experience, what you would like to change, you're not going to have the opportunity to change because you won't see what needs to be changed. That, I think, happens in circles. It happens in any gathering in some sense, but not with that open invitation to become, from being
That's
to become. And then from becoming, you belong. That's not mine, that's somebody else's, but I love it.
that's amazing. And I
Will
think on that note, since we're running out of time, that is the perfect way to end this. But I'm still going to turn it over to you to close out our interview as you started with grounding us. Now we'll release it, make sure we don't take on each other's energy. And I'll leave that to you, Jeanne, to do.
Well, this is where Susan Nolan is so good, because she has it down how to dedicate the energies that we've just experienced. We feel that sense of being one with ourselves, open to our own connection with Source. We acknowledge that everyone else in the circle likewise has their own connection to Source. And we appreciate all the exchange that has happened here. We dedicate the energies that we may have co-created for the better to the global unfolding of a better humanity. Because we're definitely on track in circles. And so it is.
So it is. And on that note, one last thing, Jeanne, if you just tell people if they want to get in touch with you, how they could do that.
We have a website. I think you mentioned it, www.godmotherproject, I say. It's not a project, it's a project.com, godmotherproject.com, and you can contact us there. Thank you very much.
And of course, you can always find me on connectingmamas.com, and we'll see you at the next circle for you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeanne.
Thanks for having me.